Good morning. Good morning, Estella. Good morning to anyone who's joining me. I hope you're all having a great day so far. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit this morning. The thumbnail there, I don't know how clearly you could see, but it was a picture of me this morning after I went for a run and tired and sweaty. Um, you'll probably notice I have changed my shirt since then. Yes, I did have a shower since then. But the the point of that is I've actually been listening to, and I've said before on here, I really don't get a whole lot of opportunity to read. I tend to listen more to books than read them. But I've been listening to a few books over the last couple of months. And the first one is actually one, well, I should mention my wife's actually the one who got me into running about a little over 2 years ago, that she convinced me that we should start running together. And then we ended up getting a treadmill, and I've been running since then. But she got me to listen to this book, I don't know, maybe 2 months ago, and it was called My Year of Running Dangerously by Tom Foreman, who's someone who works at CNN. And the book was really interesting. I finished that, and it was all about how his daughter had convinced him to train with her for a marathon, how he had been a runner earlier on in life, and it had been years since he'd run. Good morning, Ann. Um, and so she told him his daughter was in college, and he was living up in the DC area, and she was going to college down in Georgia. And so she convinced him, like, hey, Dad, let's go run a marathon. And it's in, I don't remember the number of months it was, but it's a few months away. Uh, let's train for this, and we'll train separately, but we'll keep a log, and we'll talk every day. And I'll train while I'm down at college, and you train while you're up here, and we'll just hold each other accountable. And we're gonna run this marathon together. And so he talked all through the process about how the training worked, and getting up and finding time to go run, and how it conflicted with his work schedule and the struggle involved there. And they trained for months and months separately. And then he actually flew down, and they ran a half marathon together as a method of training, because when you want to run a large distance like that, you can't go from running a mile or two to running 26.2 miles. You have to work your way up. And so kind of the process of getting there. And so long story short, they ended up running this marathon together. Well, afterward, and you'll notice this if you ever happen to read the book, which, by the way, if you're into running at all, I recommend it. It's a really good book. It's really well written. He's funny, a little snarky sometimes, but it was good. So you get about halfway through the book, and you realize, wait a minute, there's got to be more to this than just him training to run a marathon, because there's still a bunch of this book left. So afterwards, someone from CNN that he worked with mentioned to him the idea of ultra marathons. And Tom had never heard about this before. He didn't realize that people actually ran distances longer than 26.2 miles. But as it turns out, there are all kinds of ultra marathons, and you can go look them up. There are some that are done in wild and extreme conditions, like extreme heat, extreme cold. You can do one that goes through Death Valley. You can do them in Africa. They're ultra marathons all over the world. And so he talked the rest of the book about how he started training, how he'd worked so hard just to get to the point where he could just barely finish this 26.2 mile race, and how he decided to move on, and he wanted to run this ultra. So he trained for the ultra, and how much time it takes to do this training. I mean, when you're going through this, you're running 5-6 days a week, and you're talking a commitment of 3, 4, 5 hours a day, in order to do the training that you need to do in order to do it. Estella, I understand. I've mentioned in the past that I've always said that I hate running, and the more I do it, the more I'm getting into it. And I've really been doing it for more than 2 years now, and I'm really starting to get into it. And especially with reading some of these books, I've gotten really inspired to do more of it. But I mean, you have to do what you enjoy. But yeah, sometimes maybe it's just having the right running partner, or being able to listen to something that makes it more enjoyable. But anyway, going back to the book. So Tom began training for this race, and he just walked through how he trained for the race and eventually how he got there. And when he ran his ultra, the ultra that he ran ended up being about 55 miles. And he talked about how he's running the race, and he'd known from doing research and doing training on this about how difficult it is and the pain involved with it. And I'll talk about that a little bit later, but he mentioned at one point how like he was around the 40-mile mark and he just could not go anymore. And he was like, you know what, I'm just going to quit. I'm going to get the DNF, did not finish, behind my name, but like I did everything I could and I can't do it. And how right at that moment, his brother, who had used to run and who had suffered a heart attack just recently, called him and was like, hey, how's your race going? And Tom like didn't have the heart to tell him that he was about to quit and give up on it. And his brother's like, well, go on, come on, you can finish, you can do it. And it was the push that Tom needed to push through the pain and to actually get to the end of the race. So that book was really good. Well, when I finished listening to that one, I'm currently listening to a book called Finding Ultra by a guy named Rich Roll. And Rich is a really interesting story. The book is kind of bizarre in some places because Rich talks about some things that don't really interest me, or that, you know, he sees life a little differently than the way I see it. But Rich was an alcoholic, he's now a recovering alcoholic. And now at the age of 40, it was actually his 40th birthday and he could barely make it up the steps. He got about halfway up and he got really winded and had to stop. He was 50 pounds overweight and kind of thought like, what am I doing? What am I doing with my life? And so he had, you know, kicked the alcohol addiction and he decided that he was going to go vegetarian. And then he ended up going vegan. Again, that's not for me. I love meat and I love cheese way too much. I'm never going to go vegan, but it works for him. And so Rich ended up starting to get back into fitness. He'd done a lot of swimming earlier in his life. And so he'd actually competed a lot in swimming. Well, he ended up deciding that he wanted to try to go into what was called an ultra triathlon. Now, ultra triathlons, the three events in a triathlon are a swim, a bike ride, and a run. And he decided he was going to train. And with only a few months to go, he found one that he would be able to enter. Now, he had thought, oh, I should be able to enter one of these. This should be no problem at all. Like you can find these things. And what he didn't realize was they book usually the same day that they open up. Like the people who do these things, who a lot of you might think are crazy, they fill up the number of slots like immediately when these things open up. So he somehow found one that he was able to talk his way into. And it was I believe this one was a double ultra triathlon, which means over the course of 3 days, it was a 4.7-mile swim, a 220-mile bike ride, and a 52.4-mile run. So a normal ultra triathlon is a 2.4-mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride, and a 26.2-mile run. So the marathon at the end there. So he talked his way into this, and then he went out and he found a coach and said, I need some help. And the coach said to him, and this is kind of where I'm going with all of this, when he first started training, his coach told him, listen, you're going to have to trust me because I'm going to ask you to do things that make absolutely no sense to you whatsoever. And you're going to just have to do what I tell you. I'm going to undo a lot of the things that you've been doing. And so I'm going to ask you to do things like get a heart rate monitor and control your heart rate. And so, for example, the first run that he sent him out on was one that he barely went faster than a shuffle, because what the coach had told him was, I don't want your heart rate rising above 140, and I want you to keep it there for 45 minutes. And it was all about how your body, your body has like short burst ability and it has like long running ability. And he said, I want you to keep it there. Well, so Rich Roll was realizing that his mile time was dropping below 10 minutes. It was going to take him longer than 10 minutes to do a mile at that speed. And he's like, this is ridiculous. But the coach told him, you have to follow what I want. And it was really a matter of, you have to change your mind about what you need to do. You need to change your body. to get your body in shape to be able to do what you needed to do. And then your body will be able to do what it is that you needed to do. So when he actually went to the event to compete, when he was doing this 52.4 miles, what the coach told him was, I want you to run 4 miles, and then I want you to walk 1. And then you're going to run another 4 miles, and then you're going to walk another 1. And that's the way you're going to do this race. And so Rich, he did what he was told. He ran the first 4 miles. He's keeping a good pace. And as he walks 1, in this event, by the way, there were 35 people that were signed up for it. So that's what it was capped at. 35 was the total number of people who were allowed to compete. He noticed that as he was getting to the end of walking that 1 mile, there were only 3 people behind him in the race. So, he was number 32 out of 35 at the end of 5 miles. And he was starting to get angry, and he was starting to think, like, this is ridiculous. So then he went and he ran his next 4 miles, and he noticed that a whole bunch of those people who had passed him while he was walking those 1, he passed on those 4 miles. And then as he started to walk that 1 again, only a few of the people that he had passed him again. And then he would run his next 4 miles, and he would pass some of those people who had passed him. And then he would walk his 1, and then fewer of the people who had passed him, or fewer of the people that he had passed him again. And it was just this leapfrog effect, but kind of in reverse, where fewer and fewer people were leapfrogging him. And he realized that, oh, right, like, it's all about managing your expectations, about managing how much you're able to do, about keeping the proper pace and not going too fast. And one of the things that he talked about then was, when you're doing ultra endurance events like that things are going to hurt. You're going to have sores, you're going to have strains. He talked about all the different things that he would do, like applying Vaseline under his arms for the swim, because the strain, constantly rubbing your arms against your body. He would rub his body raw, and about saddle sores on a bike, and about the pains that you get in your feet and in your legs when you're doing those runs. And the other thing that he talked about, and Tom Foreman talked about this as well, is the idea of the pain cave, that you reach a certain point in one of these ultra events where your body is in absolute total agony, and you just can't feel pain from any one thing anymore. The pain just radiates from everywhere. And the pain starts telling your body that you have to stop, that it's going to shut down. Both of them, I thought it was really interesting, talked about how one of the most important components of running long distances, you would think it would all be the physical aspect, but they said the most important component of running long distances is getting your mind right. How when your mind isn't right, you can't possibly do that. And one of the cool things that Tom Foreman mentioned in his book, My Year of Running Dangerously, is he said, when you're doing shorter runs, and when I say shorter, it's kind of ridiculous, but I mean half marathons and marathons, you're racing against other people. But people recognize that when you start doing ultra runs, when you're running 30, 40, 50, 100 miles, and it's funny, my mom actually just mentioned to me that someone that Adriana used to go to school with is signed up for a race where he's going to do a 100-mile run. You have 30 hours to complete a 100-mile run. So like, people actually do these things. It really happens. But when you're doing these longer distance runs, everyone in the race recognizes that they're not racing against each other. It's them against the race. It's not them against each other. And they will root and cheer each other on, and they will encourage each other over the course of the race. When you're doing a race this long, you inevitably have to stop to eat and to drink. I mean, you can't go 50 miles without consuming some sort of sustenance. But they recognize that they're cheering each other on, because the problem is you against your mind, because your mind is telling you, I can't do it. I can't take another step. I can't pedal one more time. I can't do one more stroke when I'm swimming. But you have to get your mind right. You have to tell your mind, no, I can do this. I can do what you tell me I can't do. The point, I haven't finished the book yet, the Rich Roll book, Finding Ultra. But the point I am in the book, one of his training partners challenged him and said, I want to do 5 ultra triathlons in 5 days. Now, like I said before, an ultra triathlon is a 2.4 mile swim, a 112-mile bike ride and a 26.2-mile run. And he wanted to do all three of those each day for 5 straight days. And so it ended up, as I'm reading the story right now, I'm on race number 4. Well, it wasn't really a race. I'm on day number 4 of their activities. It ended up, they did it on day 1. Day 2 got completely messed up. Things were wrong with their bikes. It ended up, they didn't finish until like 1 a.m. So day 3, they ended up taking off and just taking a rest. Day 4, they did it again. So that was their 3rd day of doing the activities. And I'm currently on day 5, which is their 4th ultra triathlon in 5 days. And they're just talking through. And the other really cool thing is the friend that Rich Roll was doing this with, well, it's not cool, but it's cool that he's competing. He had an accident when he was a child where he lost one of his arms. And so he's doing these bike rides and these swims having only one arm. And I mean, one of the things that Rich was talking about was like, hey, it's easy for me. This guy that I'm with, when he swims, normally when you swim, you get up your power from your arms pulling the water and your legs kind of trail behind. Well, this guy would have to power through with his legs, and then he'd have to do the 112-mile bike ride, and then he'd have to run the marathon, and just how much harder it was for him and how much longer it would take him to do the swims. But he refused to give up. And so I don't know how this book ends. I intend to talk about the mind for maybe the next couple times that I do these things, because I think it's just such an important topic. So I'll let you know how it all ends. But the importance of, in so many cases, we are limited by our own minds, by the things that we tell ourselves. There's a guy named David Goggins who was a former Navy SEAL, and he's the one who actually inspired Rich Roll's entry into the ultra world. David Goggins does some ultra events himself. And he said that when you feel like there's nothing more that you physically can do, that you've really only tapped into about 40% of your physical potential, that it's a mental block, and that you can push past it. When you think that you're completely exhausted and there's nothing more you can give, you're not there yet. You have to get your mind right. You know, for decades and decades, there were people who thought that it was absolutely impossible to run a mile in under 4 minutes. And then back in 1954, a guy named Roger Bannister did it. Well, now, today, I believe I was just reading a few minutes ago, I think there are like 1,700 people who have done that, who have run a mile in under 4 minutes. Today, the world record is 3 minutes, 43 seconds, and 13 hundredths of a second. So it's by nearly 17 seconds that they beat that. But it took one person doing it to show, yes, it's possible. You know, forever, people have thought running a marathon in under 2 hours was impossible. Well, back in 2019, and this was technically done unofficially, but there was a guy, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I feel awful. It's like Eliud Kipchoge, something like that. He did it. It was not done officially because he had a pace car and he had people who were running with him. The car would actually shine a laser on the road to show him the best path to take to avoid, areas that could trip him up and have him stumble and fall. But he did it to prove that it was physically possible to run 26.2 miles in under 2 hours. The point is, so many times we think things are impossible. We get in our heads, we can't do it. I'm not good enough. I can't do it. And really, the problem is a problem in our minds. It's that we've convinced ourselves we can't do it. We let other people talk into our lives and tell us that we're incapable of something. Now, that's not to say that we should discount wisdom when it comes to us. But we need to realize, wait a minute, so many times my mind is my own worst enemy. Now, I realize it's a little ironic that I'm talking about all of this, the running and the ultra triathlons and all that, while Bud is in the middle of a series on rest, which he's actually going to finish up tomorrow. So why is it that I'm talking about the exact opposite of rest? Well, in reality, the two go hand in hand. One of the things that Rich Roll said in his book, I thought this was really interesting, was that stress plus rest equals progress. And that rest is a critical component, that you have to make sure that you give your body the chance to repair itself. And that, without rest, you will end up injuring yourself and you will not be able to go on. However, there is no progress without stressing yourself beyond what you've done before or what you think you can do. And so we have to make sure that things are right and in order in our lives. And rest is a critical component of that we have to, repair ourselves physically and mentally. But rest without stress, there's no gain there. In fact, rest without stress just makes us lazy. And so it's a matter of having the right components at the right time in our lives. Just like Rich Roll's coach told him he would have to change his mind, we have to renew our minds. We have to do it daily. And that's a large component of living a Christian life. The Bible is not a self-help book. The Bible is a book that tells us how to live, but there are so many of these concepts in there that will allow us to revolutionize our lives, not just to allow us to win races and make more money. Now these concepts can certainly be applied that can help us to do that. But the Bible is about allowing us to live to the potential that God has created us for. When Paul says in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind so that you may prove what the will of God is, which is good and acceptable and perfect. Paul is talking about, hey, we need to renew our minds. We need to, on a daily basis, remind ourselves of the truth. And in many cases, that's truth of, you can do this. Like, you have the power of God flowing into your life. You can get through that situation. Sometimes it's renewing our mind to say, hey, don't get drawn into that argument, that political discussion. It's of no value at all. There are other verses. Paul says to Timothy in 2 Timothy 1:7, he says, for God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. Sometimes we have to control our minds and say, I am not going to be afraid of that. I could spend my entire life living in fear of what could happen or what might happen or what maybe even probably will happen. But I need to renew my mind. God has not given me that spirit of fear. That's coming from somewhere else. And whether you believe that that's coming from Satan or whether you believe that that's just something that you're dreaming up on your own, whatever it is, we need to align ourselves with what God says about us and who God says that we are. Paul says in Romans 8:6, he says, for the mind set on the flesh is death, but the mind set on the spirit is life and peace. It is critical what we do with our minds and what we focus on in our day-to-day lives. And then finally, from my favorite book of the Bible, one of my favorite chapters of the Bible, in Philippians 4, Paul says this. He says, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guide your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. And then he says in verse 8, he says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. It's so interesting. We can allow ourselves to get drawn into so much garbage, whether it's looking at social media and the arguments that people are getting involved in, whether it's watching television and just the absolute trash that's on there with foul language and, just a sexual content that we have no business looking at or thinking about, or, the violence that's involved. And we've become so desensitized to all of this. We need to get our minds thinking about what's true and what's noble, what's right and what's pure and what's lovely and what's admirable. We need to focus on the right things. Paul says later in that chapter in Philippians 4:13, and this is a verse I remember when I was in college and I was having a lot of physical issues. I was having a lot of stomach problems. And I ended up having to take some weightlifting classes for my gym class. And we were taking them at 8:00 in the morning. And I just felt like I was going to vomit all over the equipment. It was awful. And over again, I would repeat Philippians 4:13 to myself. I would say, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. I can do this. Like, I can do this. I know I can do this. Like, God can give me power that I don't have on my own. Jesus had said, and I don't have the reference, but Jesus had said, with man, this is impossible, but with God, all things are possible. We need to get our minds right. We need to recognize the truth that's in the Bible And that's where getting into the Bible on a regular basis and just taking a dose of that truth on a regular basis becomes so critical, because it's so easy to let the world influence us. It's so easy to let the world tell us untruths about ourselves. But we need to recognize that there's a truth that comes from God that's not of our own. And if we listen to that truth, it will allow God to make of us everything that He wants us to be. We need to stop listening to the lies, the ones the world is telling us, the ones the devil is feeding us, the ones that we tell ourselves. Truth. And we need to recognize that so much of living our lives properly is getting our minds right. So that's it. I'm sorry I rambled for a really long time today, and I'll try to keep it shorter in the future. But let me pray, and then we'll get going with our days. Father God, I thank you so much, Lord, for the truth that is in your word and the truth about renewing our minds, Lord, and for the examples and the inspiration that we can take from other people, where other people can push us and other people can challenge us and other people can tell us to get our minds right, Lord, to do things the right way, whether that's the right way financially or the right way physically or the right way morally or spiritually, or that we can be challenged. And as your words, iron sharpens iron, so one man can sharpen another. Lord, help us to take control of our minds. Our minds can be a battlefield. Lord, so many times we feel like we're losing that battle. But if we can put our minds on you, Lord, the author and the finisher of our faith, if we can focus on you, Lord, you can make so much more out of us than we can make out of ourselves. And Lord, I just ask for you to continue to work through us, work through the people that you put in our lives. Lord, help us to avoid the toxic people who tell us lies about ourselves. Help us to be with the ones who encourage us, who inspire us, who point us toward you each and every day. Lord, I pray that you continue to heal this country, that you continue to try to bring us back together, Lord, and use the church for that. We give you our time right now, and we give you our days. In Jesus' name, amen. Amen. Well, awesome. I hope you guys have an awesome day. And Stella, good. I'm glad I could encourage you. And I hope you guys join us tomorrow, whether in person at church or on the live stream. Take care. I'll see you.